wanted to go live and talk about global citizenship as far as like we all live on a shared planet and earthly freedom via our all of our accessing our unique spirituality, our unique connection to source, to divinity, to eternity, infinity, and various many, I guess, spiritual traditions, even aspects of world religions, but extrapolating, the common denominator of all of those religions, which kind of comes down to being a decent human being and an empathic human being, regardless of our political alliances, regardless of our race and gender and preferences as these human beings that we are, and the collective shadow work that we're endeavoring, have been endeavoring, and will continue to endeavor, methinks certainly in a very deep and profound way for the next coming years. And the development of new communities, whether they're online communities or, of course, like established earthly communities that inspire that healing and inspire us to become more embodied, and how that relates to this idea of a global citizenship. And it's not, has nothing to do with paperwork. It's nothing to do with old structures, or certainly the structures that we've all been brought into, but reclaiming our sovereignty as beings on this planet, knowing that we all belong here inherently, we all deserve to be here, certainly from my perspective, with access to healthy food and clean water, clean air, shelter, education, and how these inspired ideas, communities, and platforms are ushering in the new age, which really is unfolding continually, and uh, not to be deluded by the expectation that it's all sunshine and rainbows and it's going to happen really quickly. But that we've been transitioning and will continue to transition, and there will be another age after the next age, but that as dark and gloomy and war torn as things will get, that there's a renewal, there's a regenesis, there's a birthing of this, a new age that has been seated within our consciousness for forever probably. And I wanted to talk about shadow work and my own experience, as far as I, I was recalling before coming live, one of my first most profound experience of the shadow after years of yoga and meditation, holding space for myself once I was triggered and seeing deeper layers of the wounding. And I was actually traveling through Cambodia, and I happened to be on an ancient site called Angkor Wat. And my partner at the time said something that triggered me, and I held it, and I ended up just crying very, very deep tears for a good couple of hours. And I asked him to just wander off, and he took some pictures and did his own little tour of the site. And I just wandered with these sort of streaming tears, and within the tears having different visions of that site and my time there. And that led to me having some profound physical changes, recognizing that certain habits and patterns and triggers were changing, and eventually led me to publish my book, The Fearless Life Guide. And in my awareness, I had no Jungian term of phrase. I didn't at that time know about shadow work the way that we're kind of collectively talking about it. So in my book, I talk about the karmic backlog and emotional storms. So in my awareness, the emotional storm is the experiencing of the shadow, and the karmic backlog would be our personal experiences, but that also ties into perhaps other lifetimes, if you believe in that, and or our ancestral lineage. And I want to speak to the shadow work in as far as, so that was back in 2013, where it was the most visceral and most fresh in my memory as like the very first profound recognition of like there's so much deeper healing within self. And that was back in 2013, and it's now 2025. And I'm having reflective affirmation that I'm kind of coming to the end of the shadow work, as it were, on a personal level. Not that there's not emotion and experiences, but it's rooting out to these sort of very obvious healing the mother father wound and having affirmative. I had a psychic reading at the beginning of the year that was sort of affirming the ancestors, being like, woohoo, yeah, yeah, that there's a sort of completion wrapping up, and that in my own awareness, there's now sort of much greater stability on a very physical level, and that stability is helping to, you could say, sort of stabilize in my own life experience the new frequency, and thus getting the downloads of, and I can only speak for myself, of course, but the downloads of the new timeline and what I'm being guided to create in the next sort of phase of my life, which has a lot to do with quantum healing, supporting others in their shadow work process, and just simply continuing to be guided, because this whole platform for me, All to Love TV and All to Love, has really been guided by my heart and soul in my own spiritual journey. And yeah, just being another human on the planet who, instead of following the status quo, many years ago, back in 2001, were my sort of initiatory spiritual awakenings, which again I spoke to recently in a share, that it's not like I knew they were spiritual awakenings at the time. It was just my life. It was just my experience and my perception, guiding me to a different country, guiding me through different processes, and over time refining and honing that intuitive gate simply through life experience, where when I was going off track, intuition, and often it was physical. So when I'd go off track, my own intuitive knowing, I'd start to feel shit. I would be getting sick a lot. I wouldn't be resonating with the people that I was surrounded by. And that would prompt usually big moves or really divine encounters. When I had my Saturn return, I ended up going to India for 4 months to train and study the yoga vibratory. And I have never been materially led, never had money as such, certainly not like large sums of it. But I'd been earnest in my practice of yoga, and I had a regular, I was living up in Liverpool, and I was alongside freelancing. I was teaching yoga by donation and working with a teacher. And there was one person in particular who kept he would come. He was a trumpeter, trumpist, he played the trumpet really skillfully, and he was coming really regularly to these donation based classes. And when my life got really bad and sour, he ended up having a small inheritance, and he gave me £2,000 to go to India. He was like, you need to go. And I got clean, and I, was clean and sober for those 3.5 months or 4 months. And I trained. I just did my yoga practice and training. I went to a place called Mysore and trained at the Ashtanga Institute. And then I went down south to, I want to say Tamil Nadu, but it was in the province of Kerala. And I went to the Shivananda ashram, where I had really kind of crazy experiences. But obviously you're learning and training and practicing in the kind of traditions of yoga, and that was the Shivananda tradition. And I remember in one of the lectures, I want to say Divananda, who was like somebody who came after Shivananda, but there was warring times in the world, and he ended up driving a plane, or piloting a plane with a peace flag behind it. And that's what that's what kind of prompted me into this idea of global citizenship and earthly freedom, is that it's truly through our divine inspiration that we have access to the globe in really miraculous ways. So it's not dictated to by how much money we have. It's not dictated to by this idea of power and prestige. It's truly guided by spirit for the good of all, right? And things like peace and empathy and compassion, that's where, from the kind of higher mind or spiritual standpoint, it trumps all of the perceived power of control and domination and power through violence and fear. And there's a certain tactfulness, or even maybe cleverness, to psychological manipulation and to fear mongering. And, in a certain way, it triggers all of our base survival mode, right? Which can keep us in that frenetic monkey mind. And yet, in my own pretty much 12-year shadow work process, when you're called in truth, you will be supported, but there's likely to be times of great kind of difficulty, because you're breaking through pretty strongly held structures in your field. So for me, there was an attachment to money, and thinking that I would have a certain amount of money to do this, that, or the other, or delusions of grandeur, just thinking because I'm divinely guided, it's all going to happen the way I think it's going to happen, which was totally not the case. And truly having to keep processing the shadow, and to keep coming back to the heart and trust and faith and surrender, and knowing that you'll be given enough for the next phase and the next phase and the next phase, which could be, for me, it was having just enough support, predominantly through my online community, who a lot of them have become like my besties now, having just enough support to pay the rent at the time, or to buy food, or and having to face my own shadow, which, largely speaking, was a lot to do with financial collapse, and having very little to no resources. And at, even though there's a slight delusion even with that, like feeling like I had no support, and yet there was enough support to see me through that phase. And the last few years, there's been a continuation of really profound shadow work, whilst just simultaneously rebuilding my life in stability. And sharing here today, getting to a point where I'm accessing this sense of, again, global citizenship, where I have online clients really internationally from all over the world, that pay me to do the work that I do with them, very much in a kind of yogic practice, or tarot, or just really being a loving presence, and sharing some of my intuitive astrological insights, and tracking patterns with them, and endeavoring to look into different things as and when they make the request, and living simply as I've always done, but in my esteem, beautifully, having a beautiful home that I can afford, and having lived through what I've lived through, having that renewed sense of discipline to the work I'm being asked to do. And staying the course after 12 years. People say, like, oh, it takes 3 years to build a business. I beg to differ. Especially when your business is more soul oriented or like spiritually inclined. And these are words I say because they've been reflected back to me. Again, it was never this sort of conscious awareness. It was just like little pieces of information that I followed. And that was a piece I wanted to share as well, as far as it's not through me. It's not through these external people, places, things, or processes. It's really what I wanted to offer you guys is that you will be guided in your own life as you awaken, as you come alive to your spirit, and you will find maybe people like myself and or plenty of other resources on the internet. That's part of the beautiful expansion of quantum awareness, certainly, is that we're relating to one another on a much more global and even intergalactic or galactic level. We're receiving information. Again, a lot of it will be dictated to by your own belief systems, but we're always really open to the infinite as far as the different dimensions we access and the different star systems and the beings in the cosmos, and then how we bring it down and integrate it into this earthly realm to express it and bring it to life. And it's not has nothing to do with this idea of going back to anything or what have you. It's, to me, it's very much in the moment, and the way we're being guided in each moment. I'm thinking about way back in like 2000 or 2001 when I was having these spiritual awakenings. I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I did my first year of university, but I'd had my awakenings and I was angry at the system, because I learned that there's only a very small percentage of humans on the planet that even have access to university education. And even in my first year, I was learning stuff that I thought, why didn't you teach me this when I was 12? Like, this information would have been useful. And then it's like gatekeeping this information for the privileged and the wealthy few. And I felt there was a huge limitation to academia, and I still do, although I'm a bit broader in my beliefs, where I think, there's value in everything, regardless of our perception. And it's not to rail against any one thing, because there's value in the entirety of our experience of growth on the planet. Once I had left university and was for years really just kind of wandering and philosophizing and just trying to survive at that stage of my life, I wandered into an independent bookstore and I found a first edition copy of Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. And he would have been just publishing it and going around. I do believe he lived in Vancouver at the time, doing lectures. And he's gone on to become obviously a pretty big spiritual teacher in our awareness, right, as a people. And I still go back to that idea of presence and aligning, and hence why we practice things like meditation or movement meditation or any kind of conscious work. It kind of allows us from within self to draw back from the external and access the internal, the silent witness. And that then also brings us into the body, which allows us to be feeling and sensing. And then how we interpret that, right? And how we're having to face our own reality. And the shadows of just, to me, transforming lower bass tones. So if we think of fear and control and things like violence and anger on a certain level of energy, which most of us would say is a bit shit and uncomfortable, shame and guilt, and again, this is very much connected to certain religious constructs, right? And that's again how you stay controlled is by functioning from within those energies, to transform them within self, which is very much about holding space for self, knowing what's happening, understanding that process, that as we feel through the presence of love fundamentally, or simply neutrality, we allow the body to purge and express, right? Let it out of your field, which is the body. the cells of our body. If we think of tears and blood and the things that we go through, these are releases, right? These are things being expressed from the body so that we can open the body mind complex up for, ideally, this idea of higher inspirations, higher. And it, I mean, these are all words, but I think of symbols, I think of infinity loops, I think of spiral dynamics, right? Which in essence is more aligned with the idea of expanding our consciousness, thus expanding our potential for creative energy. And in the here now, I'm getting a sense that the lower energetics are very much being expressed, but we're not going back, even though it would appear on a certain level, but we're retracing the steps of those shadow aspects, divide and conquer, um, shaming people, blaming people. Um, and gosh, it's so profound on so many different levels, what we're clearing individually and collectively, and how we're coming into greater unity, for the whole. How much I feel connected to some First Nations or Native American people that I knew from a very young age had been oppressed and were oppressed in my own country of Canada, my where I was born, and how in my heart how aligned I feel with an uprising and an honoring of the wisdom teachings of those people. And you would say, even to allow there to be a kind of greater leadership from within those communities, so that those of us who maybe grew up blind or ignorant to their wisdom, that we can reclaim and heal the pain and the sort of trespasses of our ancestors that would have tried to wipe them out, or stole their land, essentially, right? And of course, you see that in various aspects of our modern global economy, where we just stole people from different lands and brought them over and enslaved them, and how much of our global capitalist consumerist economy is still very much acting that out. Which is why I propagate reusing things and renewing things, and stop buying new stuff, and stop feeding that kind of that machine, as it were, right? Because it's all connected. The wars and the land grabs and the impoverishing of different people in different places is very much connected to the greed and the kind of blind consumerism of other cultures. And it's not really at this point at all really about pointing fingers, but awakening to the truth and the power of our heart and soul, our collective unity in a shared planet, healing the ancestral lineages, which is different for all of us, and being open to the experiences that we're here to experience, but like of a highest timeline. And that's something about bringing more joy and bringing laughter and bringing medicine through movement and dancing, and even such things as plant medicine, although that's not my area of expertise. But it's something that I, just through studying and some of my experience, recognize that that can be a huge part of these healing communities that will continue to kind of pop up on the planet, and to get, again, to offer you the freedom that you'll be guided on your own journey. You'll be guided into bookstores, you'll be guided to different channels on YouTube, you'll be guided to different teachers along the way. And also, just in my own experience, that I'll give you permission to, is to lay them down when that phase is over for you. That we can sometimes get attached, I think, to idol worship or guru worship, or thinking that because somebody's dressed a certain way or looks a certain way, oh, they must know and they must be the teacher, that's often part of the illusion. That they're just a human like you, and they have probably acquired a certain amount of wisdom and knowledge, but to not sell your autonomy to any external being, and to really trust in that it's the body's intelligence, right? And that's part of holding space for self and meditating and just maybe spending a bit of time in quiet reflection, is to discern the difference, to know the difference. And that's been a huge part of my ongoing process, is to sit with things and kind of work it out and trust that life will keep teaching me through experience. I'm going to leave it there, you guys. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being my internet friends. I super duper appreciate it. If you appreciate the shares here, feel free to like, subscribe, and have yourself a wonderful day. Thanks a lot for being here. Take care. Peace out.